Welcome, everyone, and hello. Welcome to today's office hours. We are so excited, as always, to have you all here. And this is such an important topic as we enter the holidays. Today, we are talking about mental health. And we have with us a very special guest, Dr. Amy Parks. She's a licensed professional counselor and nationally accredited supervisor. And Dr. Parks is also a dear friend of Chatterboss and a client of ours. And we are so grateful to be able to tap into your expertise today. Welcome and thank you.
Thanks for having me, Valerie. I wish I could use all of the Chatterboss people. If I won the lottery, I would just hire all the Chatterboss people to do all my things. That would be my goal in life.
So sounds like we could find out you really kind of made this hook,
chefs,
right?
Do you have chefs? Like next level is like I need a chef, a personal trainer, like all the things, right? Just manage my whole life. I could be just the queen, like it would just be great.
So this is not the way that I thought we would segue into it, but that desire, I wonder how it plays out, this kind of desire. If I could have anything that I want in the world, I would have this help. And how does that affect mental health?
Well, beautiful segue, Valerie. But, oftentimes we do want to just disconnect from everything. And we look at sort of all the things on our plate. And we think about we want to be thinking, what can we outsource? But oftentimes we don't know where to go to figure out our outsourcing. Many, many people don't have family nowadays. People have families scattered all over the country, the world, et cetera. We don't live in insular, familial communities anymore that allow us to really connect in the same kind of ways anymore. And so we don't have those same people to sort of, to fall back on in the same kinds of ways. And so one of the things that happens when we get overwhelmed is we try to figure out, what can we give away? Because if we give it away, then surely sitting back and feeling like the queen will allow me to be relaxed. But in fact, the truth is that is not true for everyone. Sometimes giving away things like vacuuming or cooking or even doing your own paperwork is not restful for people. So in fact, one of the challenges for work, for businesses and for people in their personal lives is to say, what does give me joy? What do I want to keep? And then what do I hate? And I do want to give away and I do want to hire out for, I actually find, frankly, some people will find that this is a shocking statement, but I do actually find paperwork somewhat restful when I don't have mountains of it. But when it becomes overwhelming, then it's no longer restful. So I find vacuuming somewhat calming. But if I have a lot of it and then I have other stuff to do, then it's not. So it's, you have to be able to know yourself and quiet things so that you can listen to yourself and your inner self.
It's interesting, that connection, because when we have conversations with entrepreneurs about what you should delegate, we say, delegate what you don't like to do. And that seems to be kind of in that Venn diagram where we're connected in that space from a mental health and from a business perspective. If you don't like to do it, it gives you stress. So seems like a mental health benefit. And also, if you don't like to do it, you probably don't do it as well. And so it's a win-win both for the business and for yourself kind of psychologically. But there's another category that we say that you should delegate, are things that you may like to do, but you should not do. So what we would say is that you should not do the paperwork because you have received your degree and your time is better spent spending time with clients and focusing on the strategic parts of your business. But now you're making me reconsider, is what I'm saying taking away if the, from that joy, right, perhaps there's a part of this administrative piece that's like a hobby. So am I telling people, to give up some of that? I'm curious your perspective.
Well, I think that you're making an interesting point, Valerie, because I think it depends on the level of person that you're working with, because your business works with people at various levels in the corporate structure. So if you're working with somebody that's in an early part of their career, so you're striving, I'm sure, to work with people all across the spectrum of business, people early in their career, people that are maybe not even in business, but I'm sure you work with plenty of mothers and people that are working in fields, maybe they're not entrepreneurs, but they're working in a business as an employee, but they have to manage maybe their parents and their parents' estates, or other kinds of things where you're doing personal sort of management for them. And so you're working with people at various levels of management. So I think if you're working with them in early parts of that, and they find it's something that is overwhelming to them, but they enjoy it, I think that's one thing. When you identify that it is at a leadership level, it is sort of something that they enjoy, but it is taking up so much of their time that it is not productive for them because they are the visionary of the company, then it does behoove you as a business to be advising them and saying, is that questioning them from a leadership, an inquiry. So I think you do have an inquiry sort of methodology where you say, is that a productive use of your time? And I think that you can have an inquiry, like a candid conversation, and you say, does this give you joy? Could you do it for 2 hours and get joy from that? And then can you be using your strengths as a visionary more productively at other times and help them see, look, I really charge $300 an hour. I should not be doing a $25 task. But some people can't see that until you bring that to the fore for them. And that's true in mental health as well. When we have people come into our practice who are severely depressed and they can't figure out, why can I not motivate myself to shower? I recognize that I don't smell good. My clothes are dirty. People are, I feel very, very low. I feel very unmotivated. I can't get out of bed. What is wrong with me? Well, depression doesn't tell you that you're depressed. Depression tells you what you're experiencing is totally normal. And this is just, something's wrong with you. And no one else has this problem. And so you just think that this is you. All about you, and someone from the outside has to be able to say, no, depression is lying to you. Same thing in leadership, like your ego is not reminding you that you need to go beyond that. I think that might just be about having some candid conversations. What do you think?
And you go into, kind of different symptoms that we might start to pick up on, and I'm interested to dive deeper into that. But as you were speaking, one thing that I started to consider is individuals that may be in careers that may not be the careers that they love. And I wonder your take on it. So for example, if you are, let's say you are a lawyer and you have gotten your degree and you are finding that you're spending your time, on paperwork or on some of these other things that you may like. And to me, it then becomes a question. Yes, you may like it. The organization might feel good for you, but if it feels better for you, so is it one about how you're organizing your time, but two, could it also be something that actually gives you that information to say, why are you spending your time here? Is it because it's easier, or is it because when I am with my clients working in my profession, I don't actually enjoy it? I never thought about it that way, but what you said made me consider it.
Or the other part of that is in fact, the reason why I enjoy paperwork is because I actually don't feel like I have the skill set of delegating. And so then you see a skill set deficit that then therefore you say, this person that we have brought into Chatterboss or brought into our work has a need for something that we need to encourage. And so then you teach your teammates, your team members, your VAs to say, how can we help you delegate that? And so, and that becomes a part of an imposter syndrome for your client. And that is sort of a sign of some, mental health anxiety around, am I doing the right thing? Am I in the correct career, as you're saying? Or is this really, going to happen for me? Or is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Or am I even in the right, body, or whatever, the right field? Lots and lots of things can be happening there.
What have you been noticing in the industry? You've used the words overwhelm and depression, and with the pandemic, so many of us have transferred over to remote work, and I think that it's opened up almost its own kind of field of issues and challenges for individuals. Where do we start to kind of take an audit? Because it's been a few years, so perhaps there are some things that we've started to say, well, this is normal part of every day, but I'm less happy than I used to be. Maybe that's a very kind of loaded question. Like, what are like some of the signs that we should look at when we're working remotely in ourselves and in our team members?
I think the number one thing that is missing from, I remember early in the pandemic, there was this whole, what was the phrase that everyone was using early in the pandemic? It was like, I can't even remember what it was exactly, but we've become so socially isolated. And so, and people value the flexibility, socially distant. Yeah, distance. We have to social distance, right? And I thought from the very beginning, no, this is going to be the ruin of us as a humanity, because the last thing we need to be is socially distant. Obviously, we need to be socially distant, but we're already socially distant because of social, all of our social channels and social media. We're already socially distant. And so now we're even more socially distant. And the results of social distancing are the suicides that we're seeing. One of the results are the suicides that I believe are the suicides that we're seeing, are the lack of ability that we're seeing in our coming up under 30s that can't have hard conversations, that literally can't, not won't, can't, that feel too triggered to be able to have a conversation, that cry instead of being able to have a full conversation, that will quit before they're willing to speak to somebody about something that's difficult at work. And this is significantly concerning to me. So I think that is really what we're seeing as a result. And that is directly mental health related. And what we can do about it is create opportunities. If it's going to have to be virtual, it's going to have to be virtual, but for candid conversations frequently with one another that might be hard, but need to be on a one-to-one regular basis, or not even one-to-one, as a group, as frequently as possible.
Tiffany.
You answered a piece of that, Amy, of what I was going to ask, but the question was, how do we facilitate those conversations? We had a conversation on an office hours a few weeks ago that talked about like what was the term she used? Psychologically safe spaces. And so like, how do we have those types of conversations? How do we facilitate those conversations, Amy? Tell us more there.
Yeah. So one of the things, it starts with policy in your business. It starts with a no whistleblowing policy that is very clearly set. So from the beginning, it starts with being very clear as a business that any conversation, anything that needs to be discussed, there's an open door policy. So that there are people that no matter what you want to discuss, there are people in the business who are willing and ready to have those conversations with people, and that no one is ever too busy to schedule a time to have these conversations. And they're not going to just be by text, that people will schedule time to talk to you. And I think it starts with that. It also starts with an open dialogue and training around diversity and equity, and making sure that businesses are thinking about different cultures and cultural norms and expectations, so that people are communicating with perspective and understanding where people are coming from. It also starts with being able to challenge people in their thinking and holding boundaries. Because one of the things that's true is that people that don't have boundaries or haven't learned how to maintain boundaries are very upset when other people have them. And people in leadership right now are sort of the OGs who have probably have boundaries. And if they don't have them, they need to have them because they're running the ship. And so if they don't have boundaries, they should be setting them, and boundaries are policy. And so people are coming up with having had lots of, opportunities. Like think about college students that are graduating. They have been virtual. They have been able to have no deadlines for turning anything in. They have had 16 opportunities to rewrite papers, and they've had endless opportunities to return things in. And so they have this lack of boundary, and it's not their fault. It's been a product of the experience that they've had during the pandemic. And so there's this sort of understanding that we just get sort of carte blanche to just do it our way. And they're coming into systems where it's just not that way. And so they feel this sense of lack of safety, but in fact, boundaries are fences, just like for children. So if you say you have unlimited amounts of screen time, this happens to us all the time. So my practice is oriented around children and teens, and I can tell you confidently, absolutely confidently, every single day, somebody comes in and says, so my kids, we are having trouble with screens every day. And so I say, well, what are your rules around screens? Well, we don't really have, I don't know. It's like, they can do like an hour and a half. There's no rule. That means there's no rule. So when you say there's no rule, it's like having a farm and you let your animals roam free wherever you want. They can go wherever they want on the farm. And then all of a sudden you say, animals, you may not roam wherever you want. You can only go into this part of the farm. They freak out. They're like, wait a second, we used to eat the grass over there and it's way better. And now you're saying we can only eat the grass here? This grass sucks. We don't want this grass. So they break down the fence every single night to get to that grass. And they're going to keep breaking down the fence until you make the fence out of steel. And then they can't break the fence. Then they're like, oh, well, shoot, we can't go anymore. So we give up. That's the same thing. And it's the same thing in business. But the problem is that these are grown adults. And instead of breaking down the fence, they quit. Or they become mentally unwell because they become depressed. They're in the career of their lifetime. They think that this is a failure on their part to be successful, to successfully integrate into the workforce. And now this boundary has been put around them and they're failing, when it's nobody's failure except for whoever didn't create the boundary in the first place.
Can I just ask one follow-up? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Val.
No, you go ahead.
You led right into it, Amy, so I have to say it. I was going to ask, how do you set boundaries, but with grace, right? Because our operation is very focused on the humanistic piece and giving people grace when it's needed. And so I want to set boundaries, but I also want to give my team grace. How do I balance that?
Well, the most important thing is to have a policy. And then when someone needs to go and needs to bend the policy for whatever reason, the policy is that they speak to someone about it. And so then they're not breaking the policy behind your back. There's an opportunity for consideration. So let me give you an example. In our office, we are closed the last week of the year, completely closed. And now in mental health, your brain doesn't stop. Mental health emergencies don't shut off the last week of the year. So I understand that. There may be mental health emergencies that come up. And we have one particular client who is 3 years old and his mom is going to have a baby any second. We know that he needs to be cared for in this particularly sensitive time. He is not particularly ready for this new sibling, and we're aware of that. And his clinician is very concerned if our office is closed and he needs support, that she can't see him. So she reached out. She was very upset that her office was closed, our clinician, and she was very concerned about this client. And rather than, she said to herself, I'm just going to see him and not tell anyone. And I thought, she told me that, and I thought, oh my God, that would have made me so mad. But she didn't do that. After she cried for a while and freaked out and sent us all kinds of messages and was really mad that we were being closed, even though we pay them to be closed, but whatever. She's a great clinician. She's very concerned about this client. She had scheduled a meeting with us, which is exactly what she should have done. And she said, I'm concerned, and here are the reasons why. And she explained, and then I explained why we are closed and why we made the decision, and about the team, that this wasn't a decision for her as an individual, but the policy is here for the entire team, and the reason why the policy exists, not to defend myself, but to explain that the policy is a fence for the entire practice. And then I said, I recognize and respect that you're concerned for this one client's care. How can we care for that client without violating the policy? So what she's going to do is be on call for that particular client. And if that client has an emergency, she has permission to see that client virtually, not in the office, and we will not charge them. So we will eat the cost of that, but they're not seeing them as a client hour, and they're going to see them on an emergency basis. So we were able to have a hard conversation. She cried. It was a whole thing. But we had a hard conversation about that. So that felt a lot like grace. It wasn't, she broke the policy. We didn't come down with a hammer and said, deal with it. But she respectfully asked for a meeting. And we could have done the same thing. We could have respectfully asked for a meeting from her, but she did it first. And so that's what I would suggest for any company. When you start seeing that sort of breakdown happening, have a meeting. Don't just say, this is the hammer's coming down. Start saying, let's talk about this so we can understand your perspective. And so you can understand ours as a business. Does that kind of help, Tiffany? Would that make sense? Does that feel graceful to you?
Yes, 100%. That's super helpful. Thank you.
And it's interesting, right? Because it's also, how do you prevent, it sounds like your policy is preventing a crutch, right? So there is that space that you start to create in your policies where, as a healthcare provider in this space, there's also that it's taking care of the people providing the support. And we've seen that on our teams as well. And kind of as it ties it to our core values, one of our core values is we care. And just today we were having that conversation about, where is the boundary for we care? We care can become very, very heavy, and oftentimes at the expense of your own self. And so it sounds like you are maintaining that on behalf of the organization. And I think that's really, really beautiful.
Well, remember also that caring is not letting someone break a policy that then shows the rest of the team that person is so special they get to break the policy. That doesn't serve them or the team. And also remember that no is a complete sentence. Sometimes you're going to have to say, I hear what you're saying, I understand your perspective, and the answer is still no. And they may not like that. And unfortunately, sometimes that is what you have to say. If you feel like you're going to harm the person or someone's going to be harmed, then of course you have to rethink that. But in the mental health field, that's of course our number one consideration. We do no harm. That's not necessarily your mantra or ethical responsibility, but that is ours. And so, we're going to make sure that we maintain that. And again, though, at the end of the day, I can't think about one person. I have to think about the whole team all the time. They don't have to do that. You, Valerie, have to think about the whole team all the time. They don't know that. They don't remember that. They probably never remember that. And they really shouldn't. That's not That's not their concern. They're thinking about themselves, again, just like children. And they're going to split you just like children too. So they're going to call you, and then they're going to call Tiffany, and then they're going to call Bobby, and they're going to ask you the exact same question times 3, just like children do. Or they're going to split you.
When I was starting Chatterboss and I was in that seat myself, it very quickly showed to me my lack of boundaries. And it's exactly those kind of scenarios that you're talking about. And, where you start to give an inch, someone starts to ask for more. And and also what I noticed with Bobby and Tiffany in those roles is that they are not like that. They have much stronger boundaries. There's still a lot of that internalization. It's still an extremely stressful role because you are carrying the feelings, the emotions, things that aren't targeted at you all the time. But the stronger the boundaries, and to the point where we've started to create scorecards, if you are having a hard time kind of creating that boundary, if it says here and it's a measuring stick for everyone, it feels much better, at least for me, to make decisions, because I almost feel like it's me setting a boundary, but it's not, it's something beyond me setting the boundary. And so sometimes for those of us who have that challenge within our organization, that's been really, really helpful. But I wanted to go back to something because I thought it was important. You said, creating that policy within your organization where there is someone available to have the conversation, and it tied into what you were saying about this clinician that for whom you created the safe space, that they were able to know that they can come to you and you will find that solution for them, because otherwise they would have just done it on their own. That's how painful this decision was for them. And so you said someone that is able to kind of address those conversations in smaller organizations. Who should that person be? And do they need some kind of special training to have those kind of conversations?
Well, I do think that every organization should have someone that's designated an HR person. A person in your organization that is, and I had my HR person on that call, because I don't think it's safe for you to, not safe, meaning something you could get sued, but I do think it's always good to have 2 people on a call with somebody that has any kind of concern like that, so that you have 2 ears, or 4, whatever, 2 sets of people listening for different things. And you always have a note taker and I think that's a strong strategy to always do. And so anyway, so my HR person was there as well. And so we were both there. And I do think that that's key. But if they wanted to have a private conversation with him without me there as the owner, they could schedule that at any time. And he does all the exit interviews without me. So I do think that that is really important to have someone like that. And what I was going to add was, around the country, there are thousands and thousands of private practices and many large mental health organizations. The large mental health organizations aren't necessarily my faves, but that doesn't preclude them from having some very, very good and strong clinicians. And so I, wanted to suggest to the people that are your viewers and listeners that they reach out in their community to one or several and interview the owners or the clinical directors of these local organizations and really form a partnership. Because, for example, we mostly work with children and teens. So the majority of the partners that we have in our community are schools, but we could do this. We just haven't done this beyond the schools, but there is nothing to keep us from working with different businesses or other organizations where there are parents or we don't work with adults mostly, but if there were obviously plenty of parents, but and offer them a special rate or offer them a package or offer them just an opportunity to have an easier connection. Because I'll tell you, if we had those kind of with the schools that we have partnerships with, those parents get in with us faster just because they know us. And so it's not that they have like a special deal, but they just know us. And we know them. So they get service faster than other people do just because they know who to call. And in this climate, it's very hard to get mental health treatment because there's such a lack of providers. And so if you're looking to have some support for your teams, I would strongly recommend, and even if you don't get discounted services, or you find out an opportunity that people, you offer an insurance policy and they take your insurance policy, just to have some of those connections. We don't, most insurances, or very, very few insurances, have great mental health benefits. And so it's on us as business owners to have to do that legwork ourselves. It really, unfortunately, it just really is. And in light of, the suicides and, the losses of Twitch Boss and the people that we've seen lately, and, it's so, people put forward their best faces at work and on social media, but you just have no idea what's happening behind the scenes. And to be able to just say, even as a benefit, like, we have a partnership with the Wise family, or we have a partnership with XYZ mental health firm, just that, what a benefit that is. Even, I mean, gosh, even if it just means, you have a special phone number, or you get $5 off, or you get a free water bottle every time you show up. Who the heck cares what the benefit? Just knowing that you have done the work to make it important enough to connect them. That says so much about how you value mental health.
And, a lot of entrepreneurs, they go into their businesses because they're good at something, because something ignites them. But almost always there is that second underlying driver that's sometimes bigger than the one that drives the monetary piece, which is, how can I affect communities around me? And what's interesting in this conversation is, we recently, on another office hours, we were having the conversation about, how to find your calling when it comes to that nonprofit sector, how to find the communities that you want to impact. And myself included, I think that entrepreneurs sometimes forget that there are people right there within their organization. You can have the biggest impact on the people within your organization. So before you start to go outside, before you start to leave the country, before you start to leave the world and go out,
We're going outer space.
We should try to see what we can have the greatest impact on here. And that's why this conversation is so meaningful at this time, because for us as an organization, we are looking to see what are the ways that we can give back. We do understand the value of mental health, and we want to be able to provide more. Over the last 6 years, we have seen individuals within our organization go through so many hard things. And one thing, I can say as a business owner to other business owners is, maybe this, it kind of goes to looking. You can see, usually as the business owner, that something is starting to change for the individuals within your organization if you are paying attention. And so there is that part of it, the people that you are responsible for keeping in close contact, and I would say it's a responsibility to stay vigilant. And always when for me, it was always when I see performance decrease, I have started from having the experience of that correlation, that when performance drops, there is usually something really big on the other side on the personal level. So I've trained myself in the beginning as a young entrepreneur. I would say something's wrong with that person. They're not performing. And I would go into that mode. But with time, I started to, my default is now something is wrong. And how can I help? And then people don't always share right away. We've had a lot of situations where people will not share, they're not comfortable sharing. And then 6 months later, they will say, you know what, this has been happening. And so we can never, I think that we will never regret giving more empathy. We will never regret giving more leeway to someone or a benefit of a doubt. But what we can regret is at a moment where someone just needs something more gentle, coming in a little bit too harsh. So I think that that's a good reminder for us in those positions, and just everyone where we're interacting with other people all the time.
Yeah, and I think building the opportunity to have these sort of smaller conversations and check-ins where it is, a more personal sort of attention to things. It's not hard for us to pay closer attention to our clinicians because we're sort of like the Rockettes of mental health. Like I know on a daily basis if someone's broken their ankle because they can't do their work. If they can't, like every day I know if they can't show up, because you can't do mental health work if you don't have strong mental health. They have to be in their own therapy. They have to do their own work, at least to be good. And that's our requirement, is excellence. So I know I'm monitoring them all the time. And so they have times where they have to dip out, and that's just what we do to stay good. And that's okay. I think it's easier to hide in today's world. It's just super easy to hide. And so figuring out how to allow your staff to feel private and yet and supported, but not hide, is hard. To find balance.
I'm wondering, as we explore, those opportunities in mental health. So there's one thing from like a logistics standpoint that I'm curious. What I'm understanding is that if you're a company like Chatterboss, and we have the desire to align with an organization, what some of the feedback that we've been getting as we've been doing that research is that you guys are remote, your people are everywhere, and you're going to have a hard time finding an organization that's going to have clinicians in different states. So I'm curious, what is your advice? Is this a real red tape? Are we getting, are we being misled somewhere? Like, it feels so strange. First of all, just as a requirement altogether, right? Like mental health is mental health. So it feels so strange to me. I understand lawyers, right? I understand CPAs. Different states have different requirements. But to have psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists bound by different states in their ability to serve others sounds so crazy to me. Maybe you could educate us a little bit about that.
Well, I could spend all day talking about that dilemma. And I created a directory that is called the Clinical Supervision Directory that is designed to essentially help try to solve the problem of getting people licensed across the country, because it is such a problem. And just like lawyers and the other people you referred to, clinicians in mental health, social workers, and licensed professional counselors have the exact same problem. Licensure requirements across states are different in every single state in the country. In the 51 or 50+1 states, if you include DC, in just the licensed professional counseling field, just the mental health field, not social workers, just counselors, in the 50 states and plus DC, so 51, there are 32 different credentialed names, titles, 32 different titles of counselors. So like little letters after your name, like LPC, LCSW, or not LCSW, LPCP, LP, blah, 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 blah. I mean, it's like alphabet soup. So if I don't even know them all and I am a clinician, how are you supposed to know them all? So I will tell you, to assure you, that there are solutions for companies like yours. They're not my favorite, but there are solutions, because people have looked and said the same thing. Well, darn it, like, how do we solve this problem? So thankfully, for the mental health solution role, solving purposes, there are companies that are they hire across the country clinicians that are licensed in each state. So Talkspace, BetterHelp, ones that you see with major advertising money on social media. The reason why they're not my favorite is because they have major advertising money and they don't pay their clinicians very well, and they basically put us out of business, the smaller clinicians and smaller practices. That all being said, that doesn't mean I'm going out of business, and that's all, you know, there's got to be room for everybody. So more power to you, whatever. So they solve your problem. And if they solve your problem, then I'm happy. So they would solve your problem. You need to contact those kinds of companies and look at the 3 or 4 or 5 of them and find which one best serves you and talk to them. And because they're designed for exactly your kind of company. Now, if you don't have a company like that, if you have a company that's just based in Illinois, then go to the one down the street. Please go to the one down the street. Don't go to the cheapest one because it's the cheapest one, because the cheapest one is not always the best one. That doesn't mean that these companies I'm referencing, please don't sue me, are not great. I'm sure that many of them are excellent. You can also find great services in lots of other places as well.
And so tell me a little bit more about the directory, because one thing, you know, and I know about companies like BetterHelp and Talkspace, and we also work with The Difference. And so all of that is very exciting. And maybe it's just my impression, so I'd love, maybe you can correct it. What I understood is that in some of those services, you are getting connected and you're getting that, you know, you're getting help almost like in a journal style way. I'm typing to you, you will answer me within 24 hours. And so I think that that's wildly helpful, because journaling without anyone answering you is already wildly helpful. And we were just having that discussion as a team that sometimes you have tools that sometimes we think that, you know, we need support, and we do need support. I think that if in my world, if I had like unlimited resources, I would go to therapy all day long. I would just sit in therapy. No, then I would give myself some small window of time to interact with the real world to test my skills, but then I would dive back into therapy, and that's how I would spend my days. And it would feel.
Please, can we just switch lives? Because I'd much rather live in New York than I'm in therapy all day.
And I'm moving actually from New York, so that's my sad moment. But so having you know, having experienced the benefits of therapy, what I know to be true is that if everyone had access to therapy, that is amazing in whichever form. And so we should strive. And I don't like to say should, right? Because that's like, you should do this, right? But for me, it's been wildly helpful. And I wish for other individuals with whom I have contact with to have these same accelerated results and that alleviation of certain kind of pains. And so that's amazing. And then there are these other tools, right? That you can, if you're not yet ready for therapy, if it doesn't feel accessible. And I would like to talk about that, right? Because you mentioned that if the reason that you're not starting is because you are not ready, well, what would you say to someone who says that I know I need it, I'm kind of dipping my toes into it, I have some signs that it's important, but I really can't get myself to schedule? What would you say to get past that barrier?
Okay, so you asked me a bunch of questions, so I'm going to try to answer them in order. So first of all, the Clinical Supervision Directory is designed to help get more mental health clinicians on the ground, because we have a massive mental health shortage, and the training is very time intensive. Graduates from graduate school require 200 hours of supervision that takes about 2 years of training. And to find a supervisor across the US is a challenging task. We need more mental health clinicians. But imagine a world, Valerie, that everyone from birth had to, in addition to seeing their pediatrician, every year for an hour had to go to therapy. Just once a year, but you could go more if you wanted, but they just had to go once till they die, just once. But you could, again, you could go more if you wanted to, but you just had to go once, just once. Imagine if every single person had to do that. It was a requirement, like prostate exam, like everyone had to do it. mammogram.
Strong
You get a little,
recommendation, right?
you
A
get a
strong
little
recommendation.
prescription. You get a little thing. You have to go to your thing. You have to get a I mean, we all have to have our parts looked at. Why can't we have our brain looked at? Why the heck are we not doing this? It makes no sense whatsoever. Why are we not? We have to look at every other part. My God, people have their toenails done more often than they have their mental health checked. So imagine that. Okay. So if people just want to get their little fancy toes into therapy, all they have to do is find someone. Number one, if they know someone that's in therapy, that's the number one thing. Ask them who they go to. Find someone you trust and ask them who they see. That's the number one way to do it. If you don't know anybody in therapy, then you can go online and look up therapists in your area. There are lots of different therapy directories. Therapy Den is one of the best ones, my favorite. But Psychology Today is a great source. Google it. Fine, great, do that. So if you can start there by looking by your zip code. So those are some ways you can get started. But asking a friend is the number one thing. Ask your doctor, ask your primary care provider, ask your pediatrician. Most of them know therapists in the area because we partner with all of them. Ask at your school, ask your OBGYN, ask people you trust, and then call them. And when you call them, if the people that answer their phone, hopefully they don't work for Chatterboss. If they're really good, they work for Chatterboss and they answer and they're great. If they suck when you call them, hang up, call someone else. If they have poor answering skills, they don't call you back, don't go there. Call someone else, because that's a sign that they're not going to be people that you want to work with. And I will guarantee you there will be people that won't call you back. But find someone that's going to work with you. And yes, thank you, Kirsten. Email might be a good first step. Sometimes it is. Sometimes if you're like me, you get 9 billion jillion emails a day and they do get lost. However, do that too, because that might feel safer for you, might feel less confronting. Email, great. But do that, start there and say, you know what? I need a therapy appointment. I promise you, no one's going to say, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? Why do you need therapy? Any good person is going to say, tell me a little bit more about you.
You know what's interesting in what you say, and you know, because you mentioned about like what happens as part of that first experience, you know, when you do reach out, what that could look like, and it's this kind of like logistical administrative thing. Like you have to find the person, and then you have to find a way to reach out. And at least for me, therapy started at that moment of reaching out. And you say something interesting, you know, if the person kind of sucks, right, kind of hang up. So I found that I was extremely judgmental about every person that I spoke with. And I now realize some of those judgments were correct, useful, and some of them were not. For example, I expected the person to pick up on me right away. I'm calling in a potentially mental health crisis. I'm reaching out. I thought that the whole world is waiting for me to say, you have decided to go to therapy. We are all here. And people took time to come back. And so, you know, I think it's important to kind of frame for yourself that when you are ready, it feels like everyone else is ready and waiting for you. But some people took 24 hours to get back. And I had a lot of problems with boundaries. So I thought, what is going on with that person? And so I almost didn't end up meeting the person who ended up being my therapist because he called me back, you know, 21 hours later. I was very upset about that. I didn't want to return his call. Then I slept on it and I realized, you know, that's not correct. And, you know, and I went through all of that. But I think that it's important to note because it's very sensitive, those few.
Well, so you have to understand, I mean, just not to defend that person, but also you're the person that sends us the phone call, the email, the text, then another phone call, then a second email, then also reaches out to our website and our text chain, like all the things. And so then what that does, if you know anything, I mean, you know everything about how that gums up our system. That just doing that, reaching out to us 7 different ways makes it even that much harder for us to get to you. But what happens is, think about this, because we have no requirement to meet everybody in the world once a year, every year, there are 1/10,000th of us as compared to doctors. There aren't enough of us. So we get at the Wise Family, we probably get 20 referrals a day. We can't call those people back every single day within 24 hours. We just can't. We can't get to them fast enough. So everyone's doing the very best they can. And yes, we want to respond to you right away. We all do. And that is very, very challenging. You're right. It's a very difficult thing. So if it doesn't feel good, I would say move on. And if you can be patient, stick with it. So I think I appreciate that you did stick with it, but and that you also sort of checked in with yourself. Do I have reasonable expectations? And I would also say for the therapists out there, put an autoresponder that sets the expectations, because that's where your boundaries are. So it's tricky. It's a very tricky process trying to figure out this admin thing. And then of course, most of us in mental health were never taught how to run a business. So, none of us know how to do half the things we're supposed to be doing on a daily basis, which is why we need Chatterboss. So
it's very interesting. And we have a few minutes left. What I do want to cover is how to find, aside from those like logistical things, what those first few stages are. Should you kind of like dating, interview a few people and all of that? So I want to give a few minutes to that. And I want to end with some resources. If someone is going through a hard time, we mentioned a few kind of heavy topics. And so if you would be able to, put any links in here for people to have as reference.
Absolutely. So yeah, I do think that I know that for me, for finding a therapist, because I've lived in the same community my whole life and worked in the same community my whole life. So my therapist is actually 40 miles away. It took me a long time to find somebody, because I had to find somebody I didn't know, who didn't know me, who would also not ask me anything about running a business. And so I literally, when I called them, I actually gave them a different email address. They don't know anything about my practice. I, literally said, you can, never ask me anything about running a business. We can't be in any of the same, I was really kind of a brat, but I just said, I'm not coming to you for anything that has, if it comes up, great. But and she was very respectful of that boundary, but it can be really challenging to find the right person that feels like the right fit. So don't hesitate to ask around, to interview somebody and to say, this feels like a good fit or it doesn't. And sometimes people go to individual, sometimes they find a group that feels really good for them. So don't hesitate to think about joining a support group. And that's a good, often a good entry for people. Financially, it can be a good entry. And oftentimes people feel really comfortable in a support group environment where it's just a little less like just me talking to one person, exclusively, but they can do a little bit more listening and things like that. And they're usually themed around a specific thing, substance use or parenting or anxiety or, bipolar disorder or depression, things like that. So, don't hesitate to do that as well. But I would talk to, a couple different people if you want to do that. And, we're very lucky that we have 988, which is the suicide hotline. That is my number one resource that I give people all the time. And what I also tell people, especially teenagers and parents, don't hesitate to call if you are feeling depressed or someone that experiences suicidal ideation. Please, encourage them, call the suicide hotline even when you're not feeling suicidal, and talk to them to find out what they're going to say. Because the worst thing is to not call because you don't know what they're going to say and you're afraid. So then you don't call because you think you're going to be embarrassed, or they're going to say something weird, or you're going to say something, that you're going to say something weird, or they're not going to like you or whatever. For whatever reason, you don't feel like calling them. Call them and say, I'm not feeling suicidal right now, but I just want to know what you're going to say to me if I am. They'll be thrilled to talk to you. That's their job. So don't hesitate to call and say, I just want to know what you might say and how you might help me. And they'll tell you. They love to do that. And I always tell teens to do that. And all my clinicians have to call at onboarding. Part of their onboarding is to call the
Mhm.
suicide hotline. And they say, hi, I'm a clinician. Like, tell me what you say. All my students have to do it too. So
Brilliant, brilliant advice. I've never heard it. I wish I heard it before, to have had the opportunity to share it with more people, but I will going forward. That is amazing, to know that people can be stopped from getting the support that they need in that moment. And so there is this opportunity to prep yourself and prime yourself, and to know you may never have to use that as a resource, but it's like everything else, right? We have health insurance, we have we have phone numbers of, vets, emergency vets. If something happens, right, we know where our nearest hospital is, if something happens to us physically. And so what a beautiful piece of advice that we should have something in our space that gives us that kind of insurance and security, and just know what is the correct resource. Thank you very much for sharing that.
and a lot of people, I wrote in the chat, a lot of people don't reach out because they're afraid. And that's because they just don't understand what's going to happen. So just like calling for therapy, just like having hard conversations, just like giving somebody grace when there's a policy change or something needs to be communicated, they don't know what's going to happen because it's unknown. And fear stops people from doing it. And fear really stands for false events appearing real, meaning you don't know what's going to happen because you're predicting an outcome that you don't even know what the outcome is going to be. This false event in the future is appearing real. Predicting that the wreckage of the future is fear. And so getting past that fear is the biggest challenge in mental health. And so taking the fear out of things is really, I think what sort of mental health is all about.
And you said something to that question of, if you know that you want the support, but you're not yet ready, right? And you're dipping your toes. You mentioned a great resource in terms of, well, if it's not feeling comfortable yet one-on-one, then can you go into that group type of setting? And that was my way of dipping my toes into therapy. I really could not get myself into a one-on-one setting. It was too hard, but as a group, I knew that I could sit quietly if I wanted to. So I'll just share that resource as well. Landmark Worldwide, they're an amazing organization. I think that they're in a lot of cities.
Yeah, you can even go with a friend. How about that?
Yes. Yes,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. I am very grateful for this conversation. I think it was very, very timely, like you said. And I am so excited that we had the opportunity to both talk about organizations, what leaders in their organizations can do, and as well as individuals. So this feels like a real power hour. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Parks, for being here with us.
Thank you, Valerie. It was great spending time with you. I really, really appreciate it. It was super fun.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.
Take care. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.